Oklahoma is the land of second, third, and last chances. Who were the people that made it so? The Red River Institute, JohnJDwyer.com, me, Gwin Faulconer-Lippert, and our signature sponsor, Atwoods, present Oklahoma Gold. Together with award-winning author and historian John J. Dwyer, we'll stitch the golden threads of Oklahoma history. Here now on Oklahoma Gold. Dignifying our history through the stories we share. This is another great one from the Oklahomans Volume 2. The most destructive prison riot in American history was in Oklahoma?
That's right, Gwen. Riot at Big Mac. It's not a made-up story. It happened on September 27, 1973. Inmates at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester stabbed 2 guard officers, then overwhelmed 2 other prison officials, including Deputy Warden Sam Johnston. As a voice boomed over the loudspeaker, "In the name of Allah, join us, black or white. We are all convicts." Nearly 1,000 convicts overwhelmed the Big Mac prison staff, took over much of the prison, and took the torch to it. And in Oklahomans Volume 2, we have a rich gallery of photos from these events. And that indeed was one of the most disturbing events in Oklahoma history, the most destructive ever in an American prison, and one that spawned lasting consequences for the institution and surrounding community where it occurred, and one that could have proved far more deadly and tragic but for the brilliant intervention of Oklahoma's political leaders and the selfless courage of its lawmen. So here's what it looked like on the ground at rebellion-stricken Big Mac in September 1973. As the insurrection commenced, over 200 inmates charged a main entry gate. Guards mounted in prison towers turned back some with rifle fire, but a large mob advanced to this last barricade to the outside. Highway patrolman and future Pittsburgh County Sheriff Benny Durant recalled the valor of 8 lone troopers who formed a thin brown line here. Those troopers stood there with their shotguns and kept the inmates from breaking out of the last gate that was holding them inside the prison, Durant recalled. That's all that saved the town of McAlester from being invaded by inmates, end quote. Well, word exploded, as you might imagine, across the surrounding town of McAlester, then across the state, that casualties were mounting, the inmates held 20 or more hostages, and fire was sweeping through the state's largest prison. Oklahoma law enforcement thundered toward the prison from every direction. The McAlester National Guard swarmed to it almost immediately. Guard units from across the state, as well as the Highway Patrol, Oklahoma City and Tulsa Police, and police and sheriff's departments throughout southeast Oklahoma surrounded the sprawling penitentiary. As surveillance aircraft circled overhead, 1,000 lawmen locked and loaded an arsenal of firepower. They donned riot helmets, gas masks, and flak jackets and prepared to assault the prison, rescue the prisoners, and restore order. White and African American spokesmen for the rioters demanded audiences with both Governor David Hall and state media, access to government and American Civil Liberties Union attorneys, and amnesty for riot leaders. With the recent slaughter at the Attica, New York prison on his mind and the weight of history on his shoulders, Governor Hall sought the wisdom of Highway Patrol and National Guard leadership and his own advisors. He recalled, quoting now, "The decision to storm the Attica prison resulted in so many deaths. Finally, all of us determined that the best thing I could do was go to McAlester and try and negotiate with the prisoners who were holding 23 guards hostage." That's the end of Governor Hall's quote. But he demanded release of all the hostages before granting any prisoner demands. When inmates complied the next day, Governor Hall, Attorney General Larry Derryberry, and State Corrections Chief Irvine Ungerman, whose negotiations, by the way, with the prisoners Hall gave great credit toward the prevention of greater violence, headed a team of state officials who met for 90 minutes with inmate representatives face to face. Entering the prison, Hall also came face to face with a uniformed National Guardsman he recognized. He returned the crisp salute of that young Guardsman, State Senator David Boren of Seminole, who would challenge him for the Democratic gubernatorial nomination only months later. Prisoner complaints, including overcrowding, poor food and health services, inadequate training of and brutal treatment by guards, lack of rehabilitative services, and violence from convict bosses. Hall, Derryberry, and the others committed to investigating these issues, but they warned that inmates committing crimes during the uprising would suffer additional prosecution. Wielding only knives and meat cleavers and facing imminent attack and overwhelming firepower from the gathered hosts of state law, the inmates relented. The prison looked like a bombed-out European city of 30 years before, wrote the Daily Oklahoman's Mike Shannon. An American Corrections Association consultant told Hall that McAlester was unquestionably the most destructive of any riot that has ever taken place in an American prison. More than 20 prison buildings had been destroyed or seriously damaged. The financial toll was more than $125 million in 2020's currency. 3 inmates died, and 21 people suffered significant or life-threatening injuries. These included 4 prison employees and a highway patrolman who was wounded by a firebomb. Numerous inmates protected prison employees, however, and some fought other inmates to free guards and prevent further violence. Todd Crowell quarterbacked McAllister's high school football team around the time of the riot. He watched the prison smoke and roil from a high ridge nearby with his family. His father, Tom, a McAlester native, knew a back road to the spot that avoided the masked lawmen. Todd lamented something else that was lost with the riot, the warm interaction between many prisoners in the town. He recalled, quote, "The prisoners used to be very involved in the community. They built a lot of public projects. You would see work trucks around town with 6 or 8 guys wearing prison uniforms. They would smile and wave. They were just glad to be out for a while. They participated in the sports leagues. You don't see prisoners in McAlester anymore playing softball, city basketball, or boxing. Once the riot happened, everything was on lockdown, and I don't think that ever changed." End of the quote. Debate raged for years over whether to tear down the prison. That never happened, though the prison population is now only about 1/4 what it was in 1973. Sadly, the conflagration was as unsurprising as it was destructive. A 3-day prisoner food strike for better conditions and dozens of shootings and stabbings occurred in the months before the uprising. Observers as diverse as state legislators, Oklahoma City black Muslim minister Theodore G.X., prisoners' wives, recently retired Big Mac security chief Gordon Wright, and even the prison's warden, Park Anderson, had long predicted it if conditions in the facility were not improved. The state's largest newspaper declared that the ticking time bomb of an overcrowded prison had finally gone off. Ironically, the legislature had passed the greatest prison improvements budget increase in state history only a few months before. In a moment, we'll take a colorful look back at the McAlester Prison Rodeo, the greatest of its kind in the world, and we'll discover a silver lining to this historic tumult that provides a golden nugget to it.
The prison riot at Big Mac. Now that's Oklahoma gold. September of 1973 was the worst prison riot in American history, and it was in McAlester. John J. Dwyer, but you said that the prisoners were out in the community playing baseball and all kinds of stuff.
They were, and they also had the largest prison rodeo of its kind in the world that ran from 1940 through 2009. I believe you had a little experience
I've been to the prison rodeo, and I saw money the hard way. Do you know what that was?
Well, I learned about it from the gentleman we quoted before the break, Oklahoma City architect Todd Crowell, who's a college buddy of mine, and he retains vivid childhood memories of watching that famed prison rodeo that you attended. This is what he said, Gwen. They were fun because the prison population was taking part in the rodeo and some of the games and activities that would be politically incorrect to do today. And one example was...
Money the hard way.
That's right. They put a $100 bill on the horn of a bull, or you want to describe it how you remember?
They put it in a little bag, and then they tied the bag between the bull's horns, and the inmate was supposed to pull it off the front.
That's right. And the inmate, or in this case, the inmates, because they turned the prisoners loose in the arena to go after it. No one forced them to participate. It was voluntary. There'd be at least 100 guys chasing that bull. But among the prisoners, Todd Crowder called it was a macho thing. If you stayed up in the stands, you were considered a sissy. There were some bold guys, Crowder called, that would actually go straight for the bull and try to get the money off him. Meanwhile, there were guys getting bulled and getting horned. They would just kind of scrape them off, Todd said. Just like fans go to an auto race to see a car crash, folks went to a prison rodeo to see a prisoner get gored by a bull. And I hope that's not why you were there, Gwen.
And the prisoners would be flying by.
Literally. Well, fortunately, Todd remembered that bulls are not multitaskers. They focus on one person at a time, so they'd set their eyes on one guy and charge him. They'd either bull him or the guy jump up onto the 6-foot wall to get out of the way. Todd remembered that one time, I guess he was a high school kid, thought he was invincible. He's down the front row. Right in front of him, a bull had his sights set on a prisoner who was against the wall. The bull charged. The guy got out of the way just in time. The bull hit the wall full force, missed him, shook the entire concrete structure, and stepped backwards, dazed. And then it was like a colony of ants swarming him. Looked like dozens of guys, Todd recalled, jumping on this semi-conscious bull to get the $100 bill before he came around. These were great events. They had a prison rodeo queen. Prisoners were spectators. They had a band, and they themselves rode bulls and broncs. The stands were kind of like an OU Texas game, Todd said, with its line of demarcation between the crimson and the burnt orange. Only a little chain-link fence separated the prisoners and the public. There were no barbed wires or guards. A different time, I guess.
It was a different time.
Well, returning to our remembrance of the destructive 1973 McAlester Penitentiary riot, Gwyn, a silver lining to emerge from that was the credence paid to African-American inmate Bobby Battle's lawsuit, which was due at least in part to the uprising. He filed it the year before, and it alleged a host of unconstitutional practices toward all prisoners and segregation and discrimination against blacks in particular. The FBI subsequently launched an exhaustive investigation that found the prison grossly wanting. Oklahoma City federal judge Luther Bohannon then declared his, quote, shock at the cruelty imposed on some prisoners, end quote. He issued a comprehensive set of orders for upgrading the operation and practices of the prison. Bobby is an unsung hero, said Stephen Jones, head attorney for Battle's lawsuit and later the lead attorney for Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh. He had the guts to stand up and do the right thing, Jones said of Battle. Numerous policy improvements indeed occurred. These included reduction of the prison population size, improved health services, and prohibiting discrimination and segregation against African Americans. Yet, sadly in this case, Gwyn, you could say that the glitter of the gold or the golden nugget has dimmed. For now, the executive director of the Oklahoma Corrections Professionals despairs. Bobby Cleveland, also a former state legislator from Slaughterville, said the state prison system, including McAlester, is a mess. Oklahoma Department of Corrections Director Joe Albaugh and his staff worked very diligently, Cleveland said. The problem is funding. Albaugh himself called the state's crumbling prisons, overworked and unpaid guards, and mounting facility crowding embarrassing and unacceptable. Well, in closing, we would recall back in 1908, Gwyn, that Kate Barnard won the first election for Oklahoma Commissioner of Charities and Corrections. She soon exposed the horrific conditions of the Kansas prison where the newest American state placed its convicts and their brutal treatment there. Her relentless efforts led to their repatriation to Oklahoma at 3 newly constructed facilities, a reformatory, a boys' training school, and a penitentiary at McAlester. Now, though, one can almost feel the heart of Oklahoma's good angel, Kate Barnard, breaking anew.
Now that's Oklahoma Gold.